We are nearing completion of the project, and we're hopeful that we're going to be there within a week or so. And as the mayor has indicated, the purpose of today's meeting is to just sort of familiarize folks with some of the nature of the changes that have occurred through the evolution of the plan. We're aware that there have been several iterations of the plan resulting from consultation with council, the public, landowners, and certainly the agencies. And the most recent iteration of that was the directions report, and then the version that was before you in March. And that coincided with some comments that we had received right around that time from both the Region of York and York Region Rapid Transit Corporation, who are expressing a bit of concern in terms of some of the direction we were taking. In their view, may not have been working toward achieving the planned intensification on the corridors. So we've taken a look at some of that material. And I guess I should point out that it's not unusual, even sort of in the latter stages of going through a process like this, it's not unusual to receive those kinds of agency comments. I've been through a few different secondary plan exercises and official plans, and you often get comments like these coming from your approval agencies kind of late in the process. It's part of the evolution. It's not untoward, and I think we're able to work with those comments. We've evaluated them carefully. We've been able to make certain adjustments to some of the heights and density and bonusing categories internal, as well as looking at some of the areas themselves and whether or not they need to be adjusted in that context, some deeper development blocks, things of that nature, all with an eye toward trying to resolve some of the issues that have been identified by the region, at the same time as holding true to the direction that was afforded by council earlier on. It's worth noting, for example, that the population numbers don't really change as a result of some of these adjustments that we're going to be talking about today. So our purpose today is Marion is going to carefully walk us through the main thematic areas. We're not going to go and drill right down, hopefully. I know it's a lovely day and people want to be doing some other things if they can. But we'll try to take you through and hit the highlights so that it'll put you in good stead for when we're considering this at the Committee of the Whole next Monday. And the objective then would be to have that dealt with then, and with any amount of luck, have it referred to the following council meeting.
Mr. Nethery, this is being streamed, as you're aware, so I'm wondering, to put this into context, could you let us just remind us what the planning horizon is, what the timelines are, and when the next review of this program is, just so that people could have an understanding?
Actually, Mr. Mayor, I think Marion covers all of that off in her presentation, so why don't I have her do that?
Okay.
If you're okay with that?
And if members of council agree, maybe we could go through this and then come back, because some of the questions maybe, well, and when I look at it, it might be best to deal with the questions as we deal with each one of those issues. That might be better, because if it's not like these are if we can go through the whole program, it's not like we'll have answers later in the program. So each one of these sections have dealt with specific issues. So maybe we could deal with those issues and have questions at the end of each one of those sections. Okay.
I have a question regarding the introduction.
Yes.
Mr. Nethery.
Yes. Councillor Hempin.
Thank you. Mr. Nethery, thank you for clarification. I see there are numerous changes to height and density here that have come from direction. As you mentioned, I guess they're coming from the region. My question to you is, if we were to say, you know what, we don't want greater height, we don't want greater density, we don't want any changes in what this region is suggesting, and we just submit our official plan or our secondary plan as it stands in this previous iteration, what would happen?
Mr. Nethery?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess it's important to remember that the region is the approval authority on this secondary plan. So, and I wouldn't want to speculate what they would do, but we do need to have them on side and comfortable with our plan. If the changes that they have asked us to consider were important enough to them, and if they weren't reflected in a version that's coming to them, they would be in a position to affect modifications to the plan. So I can't speculate that they would actually do that, but they would have that authority, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Kerwin.
From the region, Mr. Nethery, through you, Mr. Mayor. Through the region, then, Rick, it goes to the province?
Mr. Nethery?
The region would be the final authority unless it's appealed to the OMB.
But they could do that. Anyone could do that.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, they could appeal. In other words, once the region approves it, anyone could then appeal it to the OMB even after the region approved it.
Correct.
Okay, that way, then the province will become involved because they appoint the managers of the OMB. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you. Ms. Blunt?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. And I think I'll start with the question you posed to, I guess, Councillor Hempen, or whoever was asked for the, actually you, Mr. Mayor, you'd asked for the timelines following the council or the committee of the whole and council consideration. And that's my understanding what you're asking.
That, and in addition to that, when would be the next review? It's not like we're going direct to end state. There are other opportunities to modify the plan as we progress through time. So getting the overall planning horizon that we anticipate here, but then there's subsequent reviews as well that we would go through, for example, every 5 years, those kinds of things. It's
Yeah.
just, okay, thank you.
That's absolutely correct. We expect the region, once we forward it on to the region, they would probably take a decision early in the new year of 2015. And typically a secondary plan like this would be reviewed every 5 years.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, I'll walk you through some of the salient changes as a result of the comments received. I think most of you have your package now. The comments received has been sort of bound in something that looks like this. I'm not going to be addressing all the details, but I will be addressing the high points as Mr. Nethery has indicated. And also, you can see we have been going through a long and fairly iterative process, and we are getting very close to the end. And as Rick had indicated, this is typical. There is a number of iterations that take place as you go through and test each of the either the concepts in the beginning or directions and concepts through to the actual draft plan, revised draft plan. So we're at the stage where we're making a recommendation now to council for adoption. The overview that I'm going to give you is going to touch on the points that I've highlighted there: height, density, and boundary changes, exceptions, transitional and angular plane policies, transfer of density, the regional shopping center, underground hydro implementation, the affordable housing, population and jobs, and editorial modifications. So those are the topics, and I understand, Mr. Mayor, that you would like to deal with each of those discreetly as we go along.
I think that would be,
I'm
more
also-
effective, yeah. Thank you.
I'm also planning to touch briefly on the Active Transportation Network. The Active Transportation Network, which is OPA 11, is also on the agenda for the June 16th meeting. And these two, as you recall, started out, the secondary plan started out ahead of the game. Then we realized that there's so much integration between the two. The Active Transportation Network amendment was initiated sort of central to the process and has gone lockstep since the draft plan. So in terms of height, density, and boundaries, and as Rick indicated, there's a number of issues that came from York Region Rapid Transit, as well as York Region, and a number of agencies, or agents rather, on behalf of landowners. And the main theme was that the proposed densities and heights may not achieve the planned intensification along the rapid transit. And so we went back and took a look at some of the implications of the changes in both density and height. And there were some issues around it, and I've identified those issues, particularly that the revised draft had identified densities and heights that were less than the current permissions under the zoning bylaw, which in the regional centers is 6 stories, and in the provincial centers 8 stories, just as an example. There's also a bit of an issue with recently approved applications and pending development. There's a number of conflicts there. For example, on 39 Davis, which was 39 Davis, which was approved in 2009, had permission to up to 20 stories, and Slessor, of course, has permission up to a maximum of 21 stories. So we have some exceptions that that would not meet the current or the revised draft policies and heights and densities. And the heights and densities were lower than the current built form, particularly at Calgain, where you have those 5 apartment buildings, and also at William Rowe Parkway, where the apartments there are about 10 to 11 stories as well. So we took a very comprehensive look at the height and densities. I think generally the approach that was in the revised draft secondary plan provided a lot more certainty, so there was some positive things around that approach. There's less difference between the highs and the lows, and the difference between the maximum permitted and bonusing. So I think that really provides a lot more certainty. But there did need to be some changes and tweaks to the secondary plan. So the first tweak would be a moderate increase in the low density, which would permit a maximum, rather than 4 stories, of 6 stories, and this is more in keeping with the current zoning permissions, which the low applied to mostly the regional corridors identified in the zoning bylaw. So the increase to 6 stories is more in keeping with that. And then also limiting the bonusing to 1 additional story to make it a maximum of 7 stories. We also revised the density and height across the schedule. I'm going to come back to that with a schematic. It's in the PowerPoint, but you can't see it very well, so I'm just going to bring that larger version up on the screen. We also provided, as Rick indicated, deeper development blocks to provide more scope for redevelopment. And we included 2 exceptions in the plan. One was for 39 Davis to recognize the 2009 permission in the zoning bylaw, and similarly for 17645 Yonge Street, which is this lesser application, to recognize the height in that particular bylaw as well. So at this point, I'm going to move to the map, and I'll just bring up the schedules because they're much easier to read. And I'm going to start at the top and kind of move my way down and just walk you through the changes. The main change here is that the boundaries do not accurately represent the zoning bylaw in terms of the extent of the regional centers. So we've just adjusted that boundary to make sure that the zoning bylaw that essentially defined the urban centers coincided accurately with the secondary plan. There was a small low density at this corner, which didn't seem to really make a lot of sense relative to the remainder of that area, so we've changed that to medium. The secondary plan boundary was refined here to capture the commercial zone that's at that location more accurately. There was a little bit of it was meant to do that, but it just didn't line up accurately, so we've just made it a little more transparent that it lines up to capture the commercial in the urban center designation. The density on this side of Yonge Street, we've modified from medium-high to high all the way along Yonge Street and over to George at this location. This provides for the intensification at the mobility hub station, which is an important transit station, and also lines up with the remaining corners and provides for more intensification along that transit corridor. Just since we're here, I'm going to talk about the regional shopping center as well. You'll see the overlay is here. Now that overlay is now applied to also Schedule 5, which is the transportation network plan. So it applies now to the land use as well as the transportation network. But I'll get into that in more detail. Also, at this location, which is at Walter, and I'll show you a little more of a blow-up in a minute of that, expanded the urban center boundary to align with Walter. And the name of that street is, oh gee, it's not on here. Rye Crescent. And
Right.
Rye? Spell makes, Error on my slides. Okay, we'll fix that in the slide as well, thank you. And that provides a little more depth for redevelopment, again, an issue that was raised by York Region Rapid Transit in particular. And another area where we've similarly expanded the secondary plan boundary is at Walter, or at Penn rather, and Hill. And I'll show you a blow-up of that in a moment. And as we go down the map, I'm going to go all the way down Yonge Street before we go across Davis. The medium high, we've extended along the frontage of Davis Drive. And as you can see, the medium high allows up to a maximum of between 4 and 12 stories as permitted. And this is an area that has a fair amount of depth. And the up to Eagle is within the regional urban centers in our bylaw, which permits 8 now. So this is more in keeping with a little more intensification along a corridor that will be a highly used corridor. Again, proximity to the 2 transit stations is important to note as well. And also extending just to the south of Eagle, where again there's a fair amount of depth. At this location at William Row, again, the existing apartment buildings there are in the order of 10 stories, and the medium-high density would I think actually one's 10 to 11, would be more in keeping with that existing development. And because there's a fair amount of depth between Terry Drive and Yonge, it also provides for a bit more density on the north side of William Row. This area, we've expanded the medium high to permit high on all 3 corners that are planning for development. Again, this is a major transit station, and it also provides that intensification where you've got significant depth particularly on the east side, and the hydro corridor separating the development from the surrounding commercial and or residential uses. Slight adjustment of the boundary at 76 Mulock to line up to ensure that the entire 76 Mulock is outside the urban centers. This was in response to the applicant, or the agent for the applicant. What we are trying to capture here is a need for a road connection, and you'll see that on the transportation schedule. There's our change from 4, and a maximum of 7 rather than 6. And then if we move up again onto Davis Drive, you'll recall that we had extended with the revised draft secondary plan the medium high to about 212 Davis, and now because the existing development there is higher than what the former medium would have permitted, we've extended the medium high along to capture those apartment buildings so they're at least within the range of what would be permitted. Previously they would have been higher than what would have been permitted. Couple other little minor modifications over in this area. This little pocket here was low, and we've changed it to medium density. It's adjacent to a floodplain. It has the opportunity for a fair amount of height without having any negative impacts on any surrounding development. So the medium density will extend in a block along that side, over the north side of Davis Drive. Again here, just lining things up a little bit more accurately along the whole frontage of Davis Drive to provide for that intensification. This area was low in pockets, and particularly up in this area here. There's a couple little low pockets, so we've extended it in a sort of a linear fashion. As you know, with the secondary plan, the lines aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be interpreted as we proceed with development applications. But it gave a little more, telegraphs a little more accurately that you want the height on the frontage of Davis Drive. Also, the medium density at this location was changed to medium-high to continue that theme. And this location was formerly a medium density. Now we've changed it to medium-high on the west side of Prospect to provide for that higher intensification block in that location. So those are the main changes, and I'll just quickly go to the photographs. There's the transportation network to also indicate, you know, some of the, there wasn't so many changes as, the only change here is mainly this adjustment to ensure that the road, we show the road connection, but the detailed design will determine exactly where that road will be. And these are just the schedules again. Let me just move back to the PowerPoint now. Oops. Now these are the, this is the boundary modification at Walter, and it includes this entire block. The landowners in this area, you may recall, Mr. Mayor, at the meeting, the special public meeting, one of the landowners came out, and since then he has written a letter in conjunction with two of the other landowners to suggest that this block be included. From a planning perspective, it's always better to provide a boundary along a road so you can have a much more clear discernment between your built intensification area and your stable residential. So we've rounded off this area following the roads rather than an arbitrary sort of line, given that the street does make a better boundary. And again, as I mentioned, the York Region Rapid Transit similarly made a point that they would like to see further depth on the frontage of Davis Drive. This is another block that, in retrospect, we added because it did make sense. Penn is the boundary. This area was in, but this block of a few houses in here was not in, and it just makes more sense to include that entire block so that any redevelopment can occur in a much larger block pattern. And this is just showing the zoning for the area at the north end of the study area. So, Mr. Mayor, those are the main changes to the mapping.
Okay. Before we go on any further, I believe Councillor Hempel wants to make a declaration.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we can go back a slide. So the area that's identified, the new area here, I actually own the apartment building that is to the northeast side, and one of the homes backing onto that apartment building. So I just want to declare that, and I didn't realize this new area was a new boundary. So just want to make that public.
So you'll not be involved in any
I will not be
discussions
in any discussions in that area at all, no,
Thank
in the
you.
future or now.
Okay, thank you. If we could, Marion, go back to the Schedule 4, and again, just for clarity, because we talked about the height and density, and if you could indicate where, for the benefit of our home audience, where the rapid transit stations will be, so that we could see put the density in the context of the rapid transit framework as well.
Okay. Now, from this slide, I think this one shows it just as well as any. That's a rapid transit station here at Lonshaw.
And the zoning around it is medium density?
In that area, the designation would be medium density here,
Okay,
yes.
sorry, yes.
Yes.
Good. And
Then the next station is at Yonge and Davis. Following that, Eagle. And then the next one to the south is at Mulock. And in the east-west corridor, you have it at the first station east of Yonge and Davis is at Longford and Parkside. The next one is at Maine, and the next one is at the hospital. And the last one is at Alexander.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Manuel?
Thank you. Mary, on Schedule 5, the street network map that you touched on, I have a question. Why there's two mobility hubs identified? There's one at Yonge and Davis, and there's one on the Tannery. Why would, I'm just trying to understand why there's only a study required for one of the two.
The recommendations on the Upper Canada Mall site, the regional shopping center, has now embedded in the study requirements the mobility hub provisions. So essentially, and we did get comments back from Metrolinx that indicated that, essentially asking that same question. And because Upper Canada Mall is undertaking a detailed analysis for their long-term planning, they've asked that the densities not apply at this stage. And we listed in the secondary plan a number of other issues that have to be addressed in addition to the densities. And one of those issues was the relationship between the GO bus terminal here, this terminal, whether there should be a bus terminal on the Upper Canada site, and what is the connectivity between this mobility hub and this anchor hub. And so all those issues are now embedded in a more fulsome analysis that I'll get to around the Upper Canada Mall. And so essentially Metrolinx will be involved, the region will be involved, as well as the town, obviously, and Upper Canada in the more fulsome analysis around Upper Canada Mall. So it has segued into a mobility hub study, essentially.
Can I ask, is the mobility hub then intended to be directly at Yonge and Davis as it's indicated on this map, or is the intent of the mobility hub to be on the Upper Canada Mall property?
The mobility hub is at Yonge and Davis. Now,
Okay, so
as a destination, sorry,
well, I guess I'm just struggling with, if it is absolutely intended to be at Yonge and Davis, why are we requiring a study to be done on mobility hub on a different property?
it's not so much a study of the mobility hub, it's a study of how that whole, there's a number of issues in that area that have to be taken into account when you do the planning for that area. And one is the role of the Upper Canada Mall as a major destination, where we see a lot of buses, frankly, taking people, and whether there should be a station on the property, or whether the mobility hub should remain where it is at the corner, or whether there should be a substation on the property. There's a lot of details that we feel have to be taken into account in that master planning exercise.
So in theory, though, if the mobility hub were to move to Upper Canada Mall, which is not, I think, inappropriate thinking, but then why wouldn't we indicate the one at Yonge and Davis to be contemplated? But, I mean, it seems pretty definite in there.
I don't think you'll ever see the Yonge and Davis transit station change, because that is right on the spine.
Right.
It's how you connect from the mall as a major station, particularly with the bus terminal, more so than the rapid transit at Yonge and Davis. Those larger buses, I don't think will be going in. It's the connection between the bus rapid transit, the bus depot, connectivity between the bus depot and the GO train station. And I'm not presuming to have the answers today. We've simply identified a number of questions that need to be asked and addressed through that exercise.
Okay. We'll come back to that in a second. So why would we treat the one at the tannery differently than, say, the one at the mall? Why wouldn't we hatch those lands in the same fashion as we are the mall lands and require them to do the study, as we seem to be imposing on Upper Canada Mall?
The Upper Canada Mall, as you may recall, is undergoing a master planning exercise. And a lot of that exercise goes around their future planning as well. So, and it is one big block owned by two owners essentially. So I think it deserves a special sort of master planning kind of quasi-mobility hub. I think what you're going to find is that like a proper mobility hub study will come out of their master planning. We've got a few little steps ahead of us on that one. The other one, the GO train station, we recognized right away that there was some issues around the role, the function, the effect on Davis Drive in terms of traffic and all-day two-way service on the GO train station that warrant the mobility hub study sooner rather than later.
So on the Eagle Street station, why wouldn't that be identified as a mobility hub, whereas Yonge and Davis and Eagle Street are? And I'm just thinking because currently at Eagle Street you have the convergence of YRT, the regular service, and GO service.
We're creatures of the parent documents above us, which is the Big Move and the regional plan, and that's where the mobility hub and anchor hub come from.
So we've got to reflect only where they put mobility hubs, even though you've got two major transit services connecting at Eagle Street, even though we don't have two major transit services connecting at Yonge and Davis. I guess
Again, I think the larger direction coming from both those documents, the provincial document as well as the regional document, dictate where you put the mobility hubs. There's no, I think with the secondary plan, we're doing the necessary planning for the density and the transportation network around those other transit stations.
I guess what I'm struggling with is the Eagle Street GO station, and it featured quite prominently in the Ontario Municipal Board case. And one of the rationales for the significant density right beside it is because it serves as a transit hub. And that was part of the rationale. I think that was advanced by the developer as to supporting that kind of density with 3 6-story buildings.
Are you talking at Eagle and Yonge?
No, I'm talking at Eagle and Davis.
Oh, Eagle and Davis up here.
And, yeah, right southwest of that corner where you currently have a station. I guess I'm trying to reconcile, their position was, the density is supported there because of, that mobility hub. Now we're hearing that, there is not a mobility hub there. It's not viewed that way because
No.
the province doesn't impose it. And we can't introduce mobility hubs where the province doesn't impose it. Is that what I'm hearing?
We haven't proposed to do that, no. That's a GO train station, or a GO bus station, rather,
And YRT.
and YRT.
And YRT's, are they moving, or have I?
I'm not
So
aware.
you've got the convergence of 2 major transit systems, I
You do.
guess.
You do, and
So-
that's why we've asked the question around the mall, which will take into account some of what the role of that station will be.
But if the mall doesn't, do we have a timeline on when they're required to complete their studies associated with their lands?
At this point, we don't, Mr. Mayor. We've been working with Upper Canada Mall over the last 3 years, certainly understanding where they are in their process. They've initiated their detailed planning process. But I can't predict at this stage, and that's why we've put it as a study area, to allow them some time to complete their in-depth analysis of where they think they want to go, and hopefully we can mesh it all together, taking into account the aspirations of the town as sort of telegraphed through the densities we are showing in the secondary plan, the interests of the region and the interests of Metrolink. So the intent is to try to address that area in a comprehensive manner in conjunction with the landowner.
Okay, thank you. Regional Councillor?
Thanks. I got a few questions, so I apologize in advance. But just to finish up there, because there's a lot of conversation I'm not sure I understand. At the end of the day, could we designate that current station, the current GO bus and YRT bus station at Yonge and Davis, as a study area, mobility hub station area, if we so choose? Could you have put it on there if you wanted it? But let me put it that way.
By words, we have covered it.
That's not my question. Mary, my question's simple. Could we have done it?
I mean, theoretically, yes, we could have.
Okay, so if you wanted to, if you're in a planning opinion, you wanted to see that done, you could have put it there.
We'd have to have conversations with Metrolinx to see whether it's one of their priorities, because they would see the mobility hub centered on Yonge and Davis as a priority, not the GO bus.
But it's not a mobility hub, it's a study area, I guess, right?
Yeah, the study area is on the mall.
But the current one at the tannery is called the Mobility Hub Station Area Plan Study Area.
Mm-hmm.
So the simple question is, could we, if we thought, or if you and your planning wisdom thought that should also be a study area, could we have it at a study area? That's all I'm asking.
On our plan here.
Yeah, maybe,
No,
yeah. Mr. Sheldon, if you could help me with that, because I believe that this was.
regardless of what's in the plan, it's a
request.
hypothetical question. What I'm really asking, is there anything that precludes us from doing that? If we,
And that's why I was going to ask Mr. Sheldon.
I don't, sorry.
That's why I was going to ask Mr. Sheldon to let us know about the process that we're going through with respect to with Metrolinx. And I think they're a key component of that decision. Mr. Sheldon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll ask the Commissioner, whoever else has more current information, but when we did have the president of GO and different VPs of Metrolinx and the president of Viva in for a meeting, and this is about a year or so ago now, the idea of a mobility hub study came up, but it was specifically focused on the tannery area. And more broadly than that, as you can see by this, because of the confluence of all the different transportation systems and networks. And I think that has been the focus, but if Rob could add to that.
Prentice?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. It was focused as a result of discussion about interest in that area in general. And it's a very broad circle that encompasses a large area. And that hub study is budgeted, I believe, in our or forecast to be budgeted for our 2015 capital budget.
Thank you. I guess I respectfully, unless there's some reason, I'm not trying to be difficult. I agree completely with the hub study. I think we need to do it where we're doing it. I'm not even saying I advocate for the other way, but I think, and I'm getting carried away, but as council, we're entitled to just an answer. Could we do one if we want? If council wants to stick up a hand and say, we want to do one there, can we? That's all I'm asking.
I guess I think, and I defer, of course, to the director, but council can direct where they believe a hub study should be done, and it would be a broad area, and then it would involve some discussion, because our plan will go to the region and then be circulated with those other agencies as to whether that's appropriate or whether it's the appropriate area.
Right. So whether it's appropriate area, whether it's appropriate in general, we get feedback from others, and there'd be obviously a cost, and maybe a great cost that might not even justify the study. But I'm understanding there's nothing precluding us.
And it could, I suppose, also have a different sequence in time as to the
Sure,
one that
absolutely.
we have on.
Yeah, that was part of my other question. If you are enabled, what is the implication of indicating it as a study area? Does it mean you have to go right away? Does it limit people in that area from doing other things? Could you act on it after the other one, 5 years? Could you choose to co-join it and say, well, actually, we think they should be done together because they speak to each other? Those are the kinds of.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just read, I mean, as I said, I think we're saying it's going to be a mobility hub study in any event through the words rather than a designation, because the wording that we've put in now is, this is one of the criteria to be addressed through the regional shopping center study, is mobility hub study considerations including but not limited to integration of transit into the site and or between this site and the Yonge Davis Rapidway, the GO bus terminal, and GO train station in accordance with the Metrolinx Mobility Hub guidelines. So we're saying it in words, but we're
Right.
not giving it the
Gotcha.
designation in the circle. So it's leaving it a little bit vague to be able to sort all that out, because there is clearly an integration.
Okay. And what's the downside of putting a circle there that covered part of the mall, or that just indicated those words through that circle that said study area?
I haven't explored that with Upper Canada Mall, whether they would find that offensive or something that they would,
Or maybe if we don't even put it over their property, we just put it on that
on that
area, only in
area.
a smaller circle. What's the harm of a smaller circle in that area? Just to indicate at some point, and it might even give leverage to the mall to say that needs to be considered more. We've indicated we see this as an important transit center.
Yeah, I think I would put the mobility hub, if I were putting it anywhere, I'd put it around the Young Davis Center and make it big enough to capture the GO bus as well as the mall property.
So perhaps staff could give that some thought and implications. Maybe there are some that would say we shouldn't do it, but if we could give it some thought before.
Yeah, and I can
too far in the
discuss that,
future.
and we've had conversation back and forth with Metrolinx.
Okay.
And we can have more discussions on that between now and
Yeah, see if it
Monday.
makes sense. Okay. Sorry, I've got a few questions, so don't
Okay.
get too hurried, Tony.
Well, I was going to say, why don't we give each member of council the 10 minutes, and in this case, because we were clarifying, and then we can come back to it as well. But we'll get you started now then, John.
Okay, we can go that route, I guess. I think I heard at the beginning, but I don't think I heard a number. Were we able to calculate the population impact of these changes that are before us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's 33,000 population and 32,000 jobs.
3,000.
Sorry, is that the increase between
Oh, the
what's
increase?
proposed
Yeah,
or?
what are the proposals before us today equate to in population?
Sorry, let me just go to what I've got it on the slide here. Yeah, 32,000, and it was 33,000 for the population, which was the same as it was under the previous revised draft, and 32,000 jobs. Previously, it was 30,000 jobs.
So these changes suggest an increase in 2,000 jobs and no increase in population. Is that what I'm hearing
A
correctly?
reshuffling of population.
Yeah, but no overall increase.
increase.
And that's because you see this as certain things in change. And I can imagine on some. I mean, we're redesignating buildings that already exist, and I'm sure we don't anticipate them being torn down to be increased by a couple of stories in the next number of years.
No,
So the population impact is
Same.
negligible.
same.
Right. Okay. And I think that's important. First, I also want to say that I think having this workshop, it was a really good idea. This is a very important topic, a lot to take in, and to try to do this embedded as one item on a committee of the whole with a decision immediately following would have been very difficult for me. This allows people to ask and try to figure things out and move forward in that way. I have to say, and I'm trying to move quickly because I'm timed here, but I lean towards the 6 stories with 7th bonusing. I'm open to feedback from staff and other members of council, but I'm inclined just to say on that designation, the low density, 2 to 6 stories, no bonusing. I can't imagine anybody taking up offered a bonus for 1 story, and I think it gives some assurances because a lot of those designations interface with the residential communities that 6 is the absolute limit there, and takes a bit of gray area, especially in a case where I see it very unlikely to be acted upon. 1 story to access Section 37 for 1 story, I just think would be highly unlikely. So, but I'm open to thoughts from others on that. Walter and Penn, the 2 examples you've given of increasing the development blocks. I think there's some logic to increasing the size of the development blocks so that we see some decent redevelopment on Davis Drive. But my question is, I mean, if the reason to do it is to increase the development blocks on fronting Davis, and the purpose of this plan is largely, in my mind anyway, about the redevelopment of Davis and Yonge. Is there any wording, or have you contemplated any wording to be added to the document to ensure that the development on Walter and Penn doesn't occur separate from the development block and doesn't have become a little strip plaza on Walter with access off Walter? Have we contemplated that?
Yes, we have, Mr. Mayor, and we have put wording into the plan. I could find it quickly, perhaps if you have a break, that talks about encouraging the amalgamation of properties to ensure that development blocks, properly sized development blocks, are being developed as opposed to small incremental parcels.
So does it encourage it, or does it preclude the possibility of development separate from and on? If you want to look it up later and email it, because
Yeah,
there's other.
I can
Okay.
get the exact wording to you, but it was certainly the intent is.
Or later in the meeting if we have a break,
And
yeah.
I haven't memorized all the
Yeah,
edits.
fair enough. Thank you.
But,
The Upper
So we
Canada
get that
Mall
too.
designation, that is new, correct, as of today? That, I mean, we always contemplated that being somewhat separate and having some investigation by the Upper Canada Mall and us into what would eventually occur there. But this actual regional shopping center study area designation, is that new as of right now?
No, Mr. Mayor, that's been there from the draft plan.
I just-
What is new is that the overlay applies now to the density and the road network. Upper Canada Mall objected to being subject to the density that we're showing on the map because they aren't finished their studying.
Okay, so in other words, the change that's occurred for right now is that the study area keeps in abeyance the density targets, et cetera, those things around new store, so they've got a little more freedom in the interim until this is figured out.
In the interim, they're subject to the current zoning.
And they would have likely, well, I won't ask, but I'm going to speculate, it's very likely they would have taken us to the OMB had we not worked with them on this a bit. And I don't see this having great implication on density or interim development. I think they're not going to do anything dramatic, so I think that makes sense. I think the last two things I want to just quickly ask about, one is that I thought I heard Mr. Nethery say earlier to Councillor Kerwin, and it's probably correct, but I'm trying to remember from Planning Committee at the region. You said the provincial, it was implied that the provincial implication on this is through the OMB, and that's the region's the approval authority. But doesn't the province have some authority role here that they delegate to the region?
Mr. Nethery.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor, although they very rarely actually get involved in the local matters. You'll recall when we were doing the 06 townwide official plan, they had provided some commentary on it, even saber-rattled a little bit. But at the end of the day, they were content with whatever the region had approved.
But I guess what I'm saying is that the province is, while not directly involved, and am I correct, they delegate it to the, is that, or am I wrong?
I think that's the language, yeah. I think that's the relationship.
And so they do have an approval role, and well, they're not necessarily all that active in it, but it does probably cause the region to look for certain things in a plan because they know they answer to the provincial,
That's
not only the
correct.
documents, but that they're the delegated approval authority
Yeah.
for the province. So,
Mr.
I mean,
Mayor,
by implication, directly even and indirectly, it's playing into this.
Yep, that's correct. It's a pretty rare occasion when they would actually come to the table, but certainly that is the hierarchy.
Thank you. And the last question is, in regards to 76 Mulock, is there, I just think, we're changing the density at the corner of Mulock and Davis to a higher density, but we're seeing, and then I believe the proponent at 76 said either put it all in or put it all out, but I think it was pretty clear that the preference was to have it in the secondary plan. To have a distinction between, we're comfortable right up to a hydro line of saying having the highest designation, but just over it, we're not comfortable having it in at all. And then right across the street, the study area goes further east. What's the planning rationale for not having the study area the same distance eastwards on the north and the south side?
No, it's a good question. And on the north side, the extension was in the current official plan, but it also is surrounded by residential. So that little enclave of 2 car dealerships is literally surrounded by residential. So it makes a lot of sense to include that area for redevelopment as a mixed-use area. On the south side of Mulock, we have a commercial strip that extends from the hydro line all the way up to Kane Parkway on the south side of Mulock. And the only reason we've included we had included a small portion of 76 Mulock was to accommodate a road connection across to the development across the road. My fear as a planner is that as soon as you add an area where there's no distinction for a line to say that this is urban center and this next commercial property is not, and the next one after that is not, is that you start a cascading of desires to have that urban center and the mixed use extend, and there's no logical boundary. The hydro corridor, which is the 500 kV corridor, makes a logical boundary for a distinction between mixed-use uses and commercial uses.
What's the logical boundary at the north and the south end of Yonge Street where we draw a line and stop the study area?
The north end of Yonge,
Or the south end?
the
Or somewhere you stop the
Savage
boundary.
Road is a boundary.
Well, it's a road.
on the
but yeah,
south.
But there's still commercial development beyond that, just as there is on Mulock.
And that boundary was given to
And we
us
do-
as well, but, and on the north, of course, you're into East Gwillimbury. But the south, Savage Road, I think, makes a logical boundary, and you've got residential on the other side of Savage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Demuccio.
Thanks, Marion. If you can just jog my memory a little bit, because I'm just looking at Schedule 4, the height and density, and almost everything on here has been changed from medium density to medium-high density. And was the draft before this, was this a direction? I'm trying to remember, was this a direction from council, or was this something that was in the prior draft? I'm trying to remember.
You may recall, Mr. Mayor, we, through you to Councillor Demuccio, we came forward with a draft plan and presented that at the Committee of the Whole, and the direction from council was to reduce the densities to what was proposed in the revised draft secondary plan, and take that back out for the public to review and provide input. So that's where we're at now. We've got that input back from the public, and as Mr. Nethery indicated, there were some comments that were pretty pointed from both the region and York Region Rapid Transit. So that's the evolution of where we're at today. So now we've looked at the comments received and made some suggestions and recommendations through the plan before you today.
Okay, so what you're saying then is council asked to reduce the densities from the draft, but we're seeing more densities here. Is it, and you said that was feedback from?
The comments received from the
from the-
revised draft
Yeah.
that was circulated in March.
Okay, so comments from whom specifically?
The comments received are part of your June 16 staff report, but we did receive comments not only from York Region Rapid Transit and York Region, but also from a number of agents on behalf of landowners. For example, Ms. Scabaris is one, Weston Consulting is another, HBC Planning is another, so they represent landowners along the corridors.
Okay, so you received, so just to make this very simple, so you received direction from council to reduce the densities, and you came back because of comments received from York Region Rapid Transit, landowners and their planning people, etc. Is that correct?
And also, we looked at the implications with respect to, as I mentioned earlier in my PowerPoint presentation, Mr. Mayor, there was a couple of things that created disconnects with the zoning bylaw, the permissions under the current zoning bylaw, going down to the lower 4 stories really conflicted with the regional center's permission in our current bylaw of up to 6 stories. There are other areas, the regional or the provincial urban center permits up to 8 stories. So there was a number of disconnects in that respect, as well as with current approvals as well as existing development. So we looked at it in a kind of a balanced, thorough manner, and tried to kind of smooth out those areas so there wasn't those disconnects.
Okay, so in other words then, would it be fair to say that in your original draft you had you had a lower, I guess, lower heights and densities in your original draft, and then you've changed it after you've heard feedback from certain stakeholders? Is that correct?
Through you,
Ms.
Mr.
Blunt?
Mayor, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I'm looking at a draft here, Schedule 4, height and density, and you have targeted certain areas you've changed it from medium-high density to high density. So what I'm asking you is, in the other drafts that you had before this, because you've obviously changed it, is it fair to say that you have increased the density from your previous drafts on this?
No,
Schedule.
because through you, Mr. Mayor, no. I wouldn't say that we've increased the densities. I would say that we've reshuffled them. The original draft had higher permitted uses as well as higher bonusing provisions.
Well, I mean, I'm not really talking about the bonusing. Let's just forget about that for a second. I'm talking about your.
Okay, I'll give you an example
Yeah,
of.
but it was, just to clarify, that was part of the first proposal. It was there, so we can't say it's not there. It was there, and so that was part of the full consideration. But what might be helpful for anyone who's watching, particularly as well, is what was the rationale? It's not just what happened, but what was the rationale and why did those changes take place, I think is what's important for us to know as well.
Yeah, the changes took place between the revised draft and what's being presented today to try to rationalize the disconnect between the current zoning and the revised draft to ensure that they were more in line, because we were basically taking away development rights by reducing the in this case, mostly the heights. The densities aren't specifically addressed to the same degree. Also, we had existing development that wouldn't be recognized by the previous iteration, the revised draft, because they were actually exceeding the height of what would be permitted in the revised draft secondary plan. Calgain is a good example where we had, up to 11 stories that are out there, and I think the revised draft was only permitting up to 7 stories.
Okay.
Just as an example. So those were the two main reasons, and then by the time you start changing a few of the areas, you have to look at the whole area comprehensively to try to rationalize the whole area.
Okay, and that's exactly what I wanted to know. What the mayor was right in his question about the rationalization, and I understand that now that you've explained it. I have my own feelings on it, but I just really want a simple answer to this. Is it fair? And I know that you've smoothed it out and tried to when it comes to Schedule 4, you've smoothed it out to make it, I guess, smooth for the entire area that you're covering. But again, my question is, in earlier drafts, was the density lower than we're seeing today? That's all I'm asking.
In the revised draft, it was.
In the revised draft, it was. In this one,
This is slightly higher.
okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
And in the first draft?
First draft was quite a bit higher than the revised draft.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kerwin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Marion. Just a couple of pointed questions, and that is where along Davis Drive, where Christ Church is, and it's slated for, I believe they're allowed to go up 20 stories.
The yellow, through you, Mr. Mayor, the maximum height is 12 stories in the permitted, which is in this yellow area here. So the maximum height is 12 is permitted, bonusing to 15.
Bonusing up to 15.
Correct.
Okay. And I have a concern with intensification. Where is the green space? If you have a building that goes up 20, or let's say 15 stories, say they get the bonusing. Where do the children play? Where do people have breathing space? Where do they have green space in that court, in that area?
What we've identified in this area is this park. The park provides a connectivity with the Haskett Park behind.
Right.
So the idea is that over time, the town would secure this property for park purposes.
Has the town already secured that property?
No, it hasn't.
They have not secured that
No.
property.
No.
Well, my question is, why, when we know in social housing, and I'm all for affordable housing, I'm concerned when you have this intensification, and we've seen it in Toronto, that you have severe social issues
So why would we let them go ahead until the town acquired green space for the residents who will inevitably live here? Because if you're going up 15 stories, how many units would be in that complex? How many would you anticipate, Marion?
Are you referring to the application at 212,
I
Davis?
am.
I'm just trying to remember. I think that's,
725 units.
sorry, 225?
225 units.
Yeah, 225.
An average of at least 2 or 3 people in each unit. So that's 750 people with no green space.
Apartments are usually
Less.
from the region, yeah, the region usually uses a benchmark of PPUs or persons per unit of 1.7.
I know about that, but we know the region's figures are out by 4 or 5%, and we know our population figures are out by 4 or 5%, even in our official census that we take. And I just have severe concerns when we as a council know that our green space is not adequate for the population even that's here now. And we allow another 750 people to come into an area with no green space that we've acquired. And I really have difficulty accepting cash in lieu of green space throughout the town. That's just my concern. We're just buying a problem, okay?
Yeah, and through
That's
the-
just Dave Kerwin personally, subjectively, okay?
There is, if, maybe just to clarify, there is some provision about the acquisition of parkland over a period of time. Mr. Sheldon, if you could speak to that, what the acquisition strategy is and how much we're providing for, although it may not necessarily be immediate, but how much we are providing for the necessary green space. Mr. Sheldon?
Mr. Mayor, just in terms of strategic property acquisition, there is a process that has taken place along the corridors that fits in with what the longer-term needs are. And those discussions are, I think for the most part, closed session discussions in terms of the property acquisition strategy. But that is part of what staff are working with council on.
Does this plan not, though, require a certain amount of park space per population, and is that embedded in the process? And to what extent, just for clarification?
Yeah, I think I'd ask either Marion or the director to deal with the specifics in terms of what our current requirements are, which they're 5% of land or cash in lieu for residential. It's a lesser figure for commercial and industrial, but if you could speak to the numbers, Rick, please.
Mr. Nethery?
Sure. Well, Bob had it right. It's currently the Planning Act allows for the conveyance of 5% or cash in lieu in that amount for residential, and it's 2, I think, for commercial and industrial. There is an alternate method of parkland contribution provided for in the Planning Act, and that is one which requires parkland dedication in the amount of 1 hectare for every 300 units as a maximum, I guess. And that is something that we will be having a conversation with this council on in the near future in terms of the appropriateness of bringing forward a bylaw to enable us to utilize that alternate method or somewhere in between based on a justification which is being done through the recreational area here as well as in planning.
Okay, so that would come forward. Okay.
I-
Councilor Kerwin, go ahead.
I still haven't finished. I talked with Mr. Nethery over the alternate, and I like the alternate, quite frankly, because over the years what has happened has been we've left the fixed figure, 5%, on a 100-acre unit. Before was 5 acres, and but in those days the lots were larger. They were 50 feet wide by 120 feet deep. Or even before that, along Lamar, they were 60 feet by 250 feet deep. But what has happened is now you have lots that are 20 feet wide or 22 feet wide by 100 feet deep, or you can call it a wide, shallow lot, but we've increased the density of the development enormously. But we have not been getting the parkland to accommodate the density of that development. And that's what scares me. And I've seen this come in more and more often. And I think this council has to go often to the alternate that's now in the Planning Act. Is that not correct, Mr. Nether, that we discussed about? But there's nothing that mandates us or mandates a developer to give us the land. And I'm a great believer in land. Money depreciates. It's not worth anything anymore, but land is. And where is this developer going to get us the land? Supposing this council says, I'm not in favor of cash in lieu of, which I'm not. Not at all. I believe we should be getting land either there or somewhere, because you're going to have social issues, and we know that. We've seen areas in Toronto, and I don't want to name them, where they didn't have the dedicated parkland, and they've had really serious issues, and they had to go in and redevelop them. So I'm really concerned that there's nothing mandating a person that they have to give us land rather than cash. And cash to me is inflated. It's worth nothing. We've seen the value of houses go from $300,000 in this town to $800,000. That shows you what has happened to the value of property.
So, Mr. Nethery,
So I'm concerned that we could end up with, if the council didn't opt to buy the land in that area, we could end up getting cash, which is paper currency.
Mr. Nethery, when is the plan coming forward for the alternate options, and how will that come before this council?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's in queuing sequence. Right now, our energies are directed to this exercise, so it's next on the list. So we would hope to get back at it. There's already been a lot of preliminary work done, and so we would be using some of the time this summer. It's difficult to give you a specific date and what that's going to do relative to council's timing. I would also indicate that, and I certainly share Councillor Kerwin's observation, although if you do get some cash in lieu, I mean, that's not there just to sit. That's there so you can buy some land, hopefully, on the corridor to satisfy some of those needs as well.
But I go back to that fact that cash in lieu is inflated cash. Okay, you get $100,000 today and it doesn't buy anything 2 years from now, particularly if they add a couple of zeros to our currency. Okay, and basically in the housing market, indirectly, that's what we've done. We've moved, and I don't know how in the world anyone who works in the fast food industry, whether they work at McDonald's or Tim Hortons, with a minimum of $11 an hour, which is $400 a week, which is $1,600 a month, can afford anything. And I totally agree with Regional Councillor Taylor that there isn't the affordable housing within Newmarket to sustain the fast food industry or the retail industry. So I have certain concerns. The other one I want to go back to is Yonge Street, where and you can point it out to me through you, Mr. Mayor, to where the Pfaff Motor dealership is, and right there, okay? Now that is becoming vacant because Pfaff has moved from off of Yonge Street over to Leslie Street, and they've really done a beautiful job on that corner for me. It's great. But what is the limit there? Is it 8 stories here?
That's correct. Through you, Mr. Mayor, 8 stories is the permitted height,
Right.
with a maximum of 10 with bonusing.
They can go for the bonus.
Yeah.
Okay, and along there, which is, so the residents at home know, because this is being streamlined, why is that so there? What are we protecting?
The depth of the property there, Mr. Mayor, is generally quite shallow. Pfaff has one of the more,
I'm well
one of the
aware.
properties with more depth, only for the small portion that's fronting, that they own. But generally speaking, the medium was seen as an appropriate density, because you have to have, you will be applying the angular plane here as well.
Right.
So you'll get the maximum height out at Yonge and then angling back to the backyards on Terry Drive
Right.
through much of that.
But yes, this is the urban center secondary plan, but nothing prevents anyone from coming in for an OP change or a rezoning change.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
But in any event, I think we've heard often the discussion that if we didn't have the guidelines within the OP, we're in a much better condition to defend the decisions when those applications come in. I think that's important to remember. And that really emphasizes the importance of what we're going through now, is to set the guidelines so that we have a consistent application.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hempin.
Thank you.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Councillor Kerwin on the parkland and the requirement and need for parkland. And I'm looking at my ward, and I'm going to speak specifically about my ward because other councils speak about their area and how the density and height is changing and the lack of parkland. But first of all, I wanted to ask the question regarding the changes, the proposed changes for Rye, Walter, and Penn Avenue. Some of these properties may significantly change in value based on what we're doing here, and I just want to know whether we've notified those residents along Rye or along Penn that what our plans are and wait and hear their feedback, and so they're notified also what's potentially going to happen. Has that happened? Is it going to happen?
Ms. Plant?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hempin. Yes, we gave direct notice to all those landowners with this latest change.
Okay.
And it was a direct mail out with a cover letter and a map on the back, which was essentially that map, that indicates that, you know, for example, at Walter, expand the secondary plan to provide depth for development blocks. The densities are on the map, so people could see what change in density would be occurring.
Okay, so Rye also, that's been sent out to Rye and Penn Avenue, that new section.
Yes, and
People.
also to property owners within 120 meters of those lands. So we did a circulation of 1,800.
When was that sent out, those last
That would have
number
been
of
sent
letters?
out June 2nd, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
So again, about 1,800 households were given direct notice through Canada Post.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so going back to my ward and looking at Yonge Street, north of Davis Drive, and seeing some changes to height and density. And really, Ward 4 and that section is probably the most densely, or going to be, the most densely populated area per hectare in Newmarket. And I see those two properties to the north of, and I think that's the areas that have changed, those two dots. Maybe you can point them out further
Here?
north. No, north of this lesser property.
Oh,
Sorry,
in
on
here.
Yonge Street, north of Davis, yes. So though I believe those properties were formerly marked as 12 to 15 stories, and now we see them coming up to, or 4 to 12, and now we see them coming from 6 to 17. And going back to Councillor Kerwin's point, prior when we were dealing with this lesser property, and there were some concerns, and residents were concerned about the development and the height that was happening there, and we pointed to potential green space at the where we have the regional shopping center area, and I'm just wondering, where are we proposing to have green space for this area? We've designated and we've shown areas. We've shown the old Mulock property, and going back to Councillor Kerwin's point that a lot of these areas that we've identified we haven't purchased yet, but they're in our plan. But I see in the most densely populated area in our town, that whole circle around Yonge and Davis, I see no designation for green space there at all. So I'm just wondering what the plan is.
Ms. Plant?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hempin. As you may recall, we did identify some of the larger strategic properties, which would include, for example, this property, which is owned by the Upper Canada Mall, stormwater management ponds as well, but we also added more to that particular stormwater management pond. That's double the size of that stormwater management pond area. 230 Davis was added. So there's been some strategic properties that were identified, but there are other properties that will have to be provided as the development applications proceed. And though at the time of application. Now with the Slessor application, we were able to secure a commitment for urban squares as opposed to, and they would be public-private or private-public, meaning that the public would have access to these urban squares at each corner on Slessor's frontage. So there was some consideration at the time of that application, but every application has to be carefully scrutinized in terms of what are the opportunities, and if there are no opportunities on the site itself, then it would be cash in lieu, and then we have to look at strategically what properties do we want to buy to accommodate the 32 or 33,000 residents within our urban centers. So, you know, we do have a shortfall when we add up all our properties.
So we really don't have a designated area that we're planning on buying green space, is what I'm hearing. The regional shopping center area is out now, and we've overlaid this as a regional shopping center, and that green space is basically out. Am I correct in seeing that?
What do you mean by out?
Well, we've designated the front portion of it as green and park space, and now we've overlaid it with a grid system, and it's designated as regional shopping center area overlay. So we're saying hands off on that area. That area is a shopping center area. Would that be correct in saying?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that wouldn't be my interpretation of what we're saying, no. What I'm saying
Then
is
why do we
that
put the overlay on top of it?
the overlay is to allow the detailed planning to be done. The shopping center wasn't ready to do their detailed planning to influence the secondary plan. We also recognized there were a lot of other things at play, which we discussed earlier, in terms of the role of that property relative to the transit system, the mobility hub considerations. There's a lot of study that has to be done now around that area before the actual designations get placed on the map. We've kept them as the designations as an underlay to telegraph the intent. We do intend to see intensification happening. The mall's not 100% there now. Their model is not to build apartments for people at the moment. They have to kind of rethink and see what their future is.
But we've designated everybody else's property along the corridor, yet we've left that alone. And was there ever any discussion or potential of just taking a portion of the front of it and still keeping that and designating that as green instead of overlaying green space, as opposed to just putting this grid system over it and saying, you know, this is a shopping center?
The conversation, Mr. Mayor, with the Upper Canada Mall was that they are one of our key economic drivers. They want to work with the town in a collegial manner. They just haven't done enough of their homework yet to be able to come to the table and work with us. They are quite willing to do that. So I see it as a placeholder to do more planning into the future. Just to be really clear too, where we have a stormwater management pond that we've identified as part of a park, we see that as a I don't want to call it repurposing, because it's not really repurposing. It's the stormwater function has to continue. And those lands do not contribute to the required parkland because they are stormwater management ponds or facilities. So they really do, we want to see them have a dual role, but do not contribute to the 5% as we have it now, or whatever our new alternative parkland dedication will be in the future.
Right. You know, I was just talking to a resident, and they wanted access to one of our stormwater management ponds, and they weren't given it. There's a fence around it, and I'm sure that's for liability reasons. So to consider those areas as parkland is a bit of a stretch in my mind at the moment. Hopefully changes can be made around that. I must say, in having such a densely populated area, and I do have concerns again about when we talk about those two properties to the north where we've increased the height and density and not having any green space there, that is a concern to me. I'm hearing what you're saying, that the mall isn't there yet, but we're looking at other areas in town and we're designating those areas and calling them green, and we don't own them, yet we're not doing it there. And I was wondering why the changes took place on those two dots to the north on Yonge Street and Ward 4. And what kind of feedback and why you decided to create greater height and density there, or why that was marked as being higher.
Getting back to rationale, Ms. Plott?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The property to the first dot, That includes this road here is the road that separates the Slessor property from MacGyver. So this is really the Slessor property. Then you have the mall to the north of that.
Plaza. So those-
And the rationale is that we've approved Slessor at, I'm going to use stories rather than meters, at 19 and 21 stories. And so when you bring in your designation here at 20 stories, one of their heights is actually exceeding that. And that's why we've got the exception in the plan to address the recent decision made through the Ontario Municipal Board and our mediated settlement for the 19 and 21 stories.
Okay. Now, also, when we widening or creating more space along Davis and Ward 4 specifically, you mentioned on the corner there where we're including Rye that comments came back from the transit, and the transit felt that we should be creating more depth on those properties. I didn't realize that transit would weigh in on having more space, and maybe you could just give me the reasoning for that and the rationale for that.
The York Region Rapid Transit on this location right here owns a very narrow property. It's about, I think my measurements puts it about 80, 85 feet deep. And it really did not have realistic development potential for intensification. And that's what sparked extending the boundary of the urban center back to Walter to provide more depth.
And how about further west?
And these landowners, there are three landowners came in. One came in at your public meeting, not the statutory public meeting, but the special public meeting.
Sorry,
And-
over to Rye and taking those
Yes, in
those
here.
homes there.
3 property owners came in
From
at
there,
this
yeah.
location, requested the same treatment as what we were doing on this portion of Walter. And in terms of the location, it is right at our key Yonge and Davis key intensification area. It made sense to add that area. It also minimizes any future conflict. If I go back to the air photo in the PowerPoint,
Not that one.
Not that one, no. I declared a conflict.
you can
on
see
one.
that if development were to occur here, right up against the backyards of these homes, there's more of a potential for conflict. We'd also be applying the angular plane, which reduces the intensification that can happen generally on this block. So you've got 2, I think, good planning reasons to use the boundary as the existing road, so you provide a more meaningful block for redevelopment, less potential for land use conflict.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Regional Councillor?
Thanks. I just want to make a couple of comments about 2 topics. One of them in general is what we're doing here, and this is just my thoughts, but I want to share it. And it was alluded to by Mr. Nethery earlier that this is not terribly uncommon. You know, one of the things I've sort of seen a fair bit at chairing the planning committee at the region is secondary plans and official plans coming through from various municipalities. And you see a lot of agency, property owner comments at the end trying to be addressed to the level that's realistic or possible. I'm going to be very blunt. This is my view. I'm not speaking for staff, but my view. Part of what we're doing here is trying to find a balance between the feedback of these agencies, property owners, the region, et cetera, their goals, their desires and their interests, and find a balance with that on our plan and our vision. And, you know, it'd be nice to just say, well, our plan is our plan and our vision is our vision. That's true, but we all know there's other considerations. And one of those considerations is the OMB. And part of this, and I've seen it at the region, is trying to find reasonable accommodations where possible. Frankly, one of the reasons you do it is to accommodate good rational planning arguments that people have before, but also to avoid OMB challenges, to save time and money, et cetera. So sometimes I think you need to do that. You need to look at the implication. We're looking at the implications, the population implication or density implications across the board are very small, and this is allowing us to look at the plan in different ways. I'm not going to say I'm comfortable, or I'm comfortable. I'm not going to say I would want, or I would personally recommend or would want to put forward every one of these changes, but there are a series of changes that tries to find that balance between other people's interests, concerns, and their authority or their ability to engage with us, and judging what's the real impact of those changes. So I think I appreciate what staff's trying to do here, which is to try to find a way of bringing this to a conclusion. We've been at this for a very long time. Maybe we'll be at it longer. We'll see. But we've got to finish it sooner or later. So that's just my thoughts on the process. I do want to speak, if I can, and we can go back to the map of Davis Drive and to the rental application. It's an area, and then my comments speak more generically to the whole issue of green space on the corridors. But I can appreciate, and I understand where Councillor Kerwin and Councillor Hempton are coming from about concerns about green space along Davis and Yonge. And we've talked right from the start about trying to have breathing spaces along the corridors. And just like you might see on, in other urban centers, you'll have some breathing spaces, but your parks are spread throughout town. And in some cases, like in this rental proposal, and I'll admit this rental proposal is something I'm fairly passionate about, but if you look behind it, there is potential for a connection backwards to Haskett Park within walking distance. So I'm afraid I have trouble when we say, well, we shouldn't allow this to move forward until we acquire the green space, or that we should be hesitant. I'm pretty sure it was questioning whether we should move forward until we acquired the green space. Okay.
Not at all. We played streaming.
Okay.
I never
All right.
said that.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'll take it back. Sorry, I'm mistaken then.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, as it said, anyway. Anyway, I would hesitate to do that on this case or on any case. I appreciate wanting to have green space in this area or at the Yonge and Davis intersection or anywhere, but in the past, we've approved the Yonge and Millard proposal, and we didn't say it must have green space. If every new intensification had to have green space and never had cash in lieu, that has some serious implications for how we plan a community, right? So, the past councils approved 20 stories at the corner of Yonge and Davis, and there was no green space provided at that point. I assume what we got was cash in lieu if we got anything back then. So I guess what I'm saying is I think it's important to think about green space, but I'm not sure if we can strive, and I'm not sure that maybe that wasn't being suggested, but I certainly would hesitate to strive for having a piece of green space for each development or each intensification. We want green space throughout, but we even have townhome developments that are infill throughout town in all wards, and they didn't necessarily come with a dedicated piece of green space. They would walk maybe a block or two or three to a park or a green space. So, and these are intensification corridors. So I think I personally accept that our goal should be to have breathing spaces or green space spread throughout, but not necessarily connected with each development. And that we do need to rely on the parks that are already embedded in our communities and that can still be built or expanded, but it's a very expensive territory. So, yeah, and maybe I misinterpreted Councillor Kerwin's comments, and I apologize if I did, but in that case, I think, it's an important development, and not every development can have green space accompanying it. It would be nice to try to see more of it, and we're certainly trying to accommodate for it. And I agree that it's going to be one of the great challenges of this project going forward is acquiring and finding that suitable green space and those breathing spaces throughout the corridors. So I guess one of the questions I'd like to talk about at some point about what is the process moving forward, and what is the timelines? And if I can leave this with one last question, it can be answered by staff at a later date, but I think it is a bit of an interesting one. If you have the answer now, I'd be curious. How does this speak to the DC bylaw review? What we learned recently was that the DC bylaw review and proposed new rates were heavily predicated upon the secondary plan. Can we enact a DC bylaw review with new rates without an approved secondary plan if it's based on that secondary plan?
No. Mr. Nethery?
Well, I noticed Mr. Mays conveniently left the room just when that question came up. I think we would benefit from his advice in this, but certainly the relationship between the two exercises is obviously tied together. I think we heard at that presentation that the biggest piece of the increase is as a result of the road network improvements that are perfect timing, Mike. We're talking about DCs, but certainly the road network that is contemplated through the grid identified here is what is being considered by Hempson in their analysis. And I guess it needs to be shown somewhere, but you know, it almost becomes a bit of a chicken and the egg. We've certainly got the two things happening in tandem. Mike, the question was, are we able to enact a DC with the increased rates that have the requirements for the additional road work and so on coming through this in the absence of an approved secondary plan yet?
Mr. Mays?
Through you, Mr. Mayor? Yes. To elaborate.
Could you be more brief?
The long version is, as you may recall, when you're doing the background study for your development charges, you're putting in your best knowledge of what the future projects will be in the upcoming years. So whether they've actually been encompassed in an official plan, a secondary plan, in budgets, whatever, we have to take our best estimates of what we think is going to be necessary for the overall growth of the town. And this would be considered that in some form or other, there would have to be this, what we call the ring road system. There would have to be in there, not necessarily knowing where the exact location is going to be, and that we'd have some allowance for some variation on that, but that it is a requirement that we have to include.
That's good news. Thank you.
Councillor Manuel?
The couple of comments, questions. The Councillor Hempton raised a question. On notification, I just want to clarify. We've extended on Aspenwood at Westerly, the UCR zone. Were those residents, they would have been captured in the notification that went out?
Through Mr. Mayor, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Councillor Kerwin?
Sorry, I think there was a few. No.
Sorry.
I have a few questions.
David, sorry, I might have missed something here.
I have a few questions and comments.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I thought as soon as you said thank you, you were finished.
No,
I'll
that was
let
just one question.
Chris finish. I see that we're heading close to about 3:15. What I'd like to do is maybe take a bit of a break after we've had a chance to talk about the height and the density, and then we'll deal with the other areas, if that's okay with council. Yeah. Okay, let's let Councillor Emanuel finish, and then I have Councillor Kerwin and Councillor DiMuccio in the queue, and if there's any other questions, we'll conclude with the height, density, and boundary discussions, and then we'll take a break. Okay? Okay, Councillor Emanuel. Sorry.
Thank you. I just want to comment on the cash in lieu versus park dedication. I think one thing, just sharing my opinion, I think I really look at that as a case-by-case basis. But I will say, you have to have both, because if we compelled each one to have parkland on each of them, it makes the financial model in acquiring lands like the Mulock Farm, some of these ones we have, frankly, almost impossible to achieve. So it's about both, and there's some lands and developments that will absolutely be appropriate for some dedication, but there'll be some where it makes sense that we capture some cash in lieu so that we can, without being a burden on the current taxpayer, implement land acquisition like at Young and Mulock Farm. Just one clarifying question. I believe I know the answer to this, but I want to make sure. Take, for instance, the Upper Canada Mall property, where you've got the green space around the stormwater management ponds, and our new standards that we implement around stormwater management ponds essentially make them bigger now. We saw that on Glenway. So stormwater management ponds and the lands that you require to deal with them, to service them, those absolutely would not be considered in parkland dedication. That's separate, distinct, correct?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Mayor.
So The one thing I want to, it's on parks, and I'm referencing the track changes document. And it's pages 86 of 156 and 87 of 156. On 87 of 156, the V, number 8, the V triple I, that was added. And I like that language. I think that was something I spoke to a bit on dealing with expectations. So I like that addition of that language. I will say, though, on 86 of 156, I think we maybe need to look at striking that language, because that, I think, gives the impression that we absolutely will be acquiring lands that are identified, whereas 8 on the opposing page, I think, is a bit more ambiguous on whether it's just perhaps a comment or on that.
Ms. Blanc?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think we could say may rather than will be brought into public ownership. Then it aligns a little bit more accurately with the Roman numeral 8 on the following page. But certainly the intent is, as we know from the document, we have a shortfall of about 23 hectares to accommodate somehow for our future residents. So I think that's a good suggestion.
Thank you. And so that begs the question then, because again, I think the 8 is the appropriate language. But, I would suspect that when we designate these lands on the schedule as parks and open space, that unless we have an agreement to acquire those lands immediately, or we have an agreement to acquire the lands down the road from the property owner, I would suspect if agreement on either of those scenarios doesn't exist, we would likely find ourselves in an appeal situation. I'd be shocked if we didn't, if someone lost their potential rights. That's probably not an unfair characterization. Would you agree, or?
Ms. Blanc?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent of putting in the Roman numeral 8 on page 87 of 156 was to allow, to address that potential appeal, because it provides the wiggle room to say that this is our intent in terms of identifying the park space. But we also go on to say that if the town doesn't pursue acquisition, and there's no time frame there, the town could pursue acquisition sooner rather than later, that it doesn't preclude an application from coming in on those properties to be considered by council in the context of the secondary plan policies. So it's meant to address that concern that not everybody comes out of the woodwork and appeals. It's hopefully giving them some comfort level.
Fair. My sense is that unless there's an agreement to acquire immediately, or an agreement in place to acquire in a 5, 10, or whatever the life of the document, that I'd be shocked if that number 8 would give them the comfort that they're not losing rights, and we would probably see an appeal. And I guess my concern then would be is what we could be looking at if we don't have those agreements in place prior to adoption. We could be looking at, if you could walk me through what that appeal process would look like, that's OMB. I guess we could look at maybe, and if the OMB foists either, municipality, and we saw on OMB what they did on Glenway, which is the only way to guarantee the lands are, parks and open spaces for the municipality to acquire it, which I think everyone understands that now. So if it goes through appeal, we could be then all of a sudden having to acquire significant pieces of real estate all at once rather than over the life of the document. So there's an in-camera portion that I'd suggest that should go with this, which is what is the status of either agreements in place for either immediate or longer-term acquisition on all of these lands.
Okay, Mr. Sheldon?
There will be they're scheduled right now, a committee of the whole closed session meeting for this Monday morning, I believe, and it will deal with a number of these type of issues. So you may want to have that discussion at that time.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kerwin.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, go back to this issue along Davis Drive. I've always supported Regional Councillor Taylor's attempt to bring in affordable housing, and from day one I've supported this project. Number two, bringing the project, I believe that the quality of life is affected by people when we acquire green space or land along trail systems, and I've always supported purchasing land, whether it was along the Tom Taylor Trail or the Nopita Trail or the Dave Kerwin Trail or whatever. And I still believe very, very strongly that the more green space we acquire, and if this project by Regional Councillor Taylor was ahead, that I hope he would consider green space in this particular area. To take a transit system across town to another green space area is just not what people are going to do. People use the green space areas in their town unless they're very extensive like our trail systems. And we're all aware very much so of what has happened with the value of land within Newmarket. We've really run out of green space within the town, or even areas where we can acquire land, or where even things are going to be built anymore. What we're doing now is going up without any question, and Councillor DiMuccio raised that issue. We are really intensifying Newmarket, but as we intensify Newmarket, we must provide a safety net or a safety valve where people can go and enjoy parks and plazas and recreational areas. And I think when any green space comes up, it behooves us to buy it now rather than later. Let's just take a look at what has happened in Newmarket. Homes that were worth $200,000, $300,000 now are worth $700,000, and there is no land left in Newmarket to develop, and that will just increase, because Newmarket is a very desirable place to live. So all I'm trying to do is ensure the fact that wherever we can acquire green space, that we do so for the residents.
Thank you. Councillor DiMuccio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a genuine question, because this is a public meeting, obviously, and this is a great meeting because we're talking about land use, and sometimes in the public contention that surrounds it, obviously there's a lot of issues. There are those who own land, and then there are those who own homes surrounding that land. So the stakes are high for both sides, and I understand the argument there. I also understand our limitations that we have in government. But what I genuinely want to understand, and I know that many people that are not familiar with a lot of these processes and policies, and myself included, it can get complex, and we've certainly underwent the Glenway issue, which was a difficult issue for council, and it wasn't easy. But what I wanted to ask you, the Places to Grow Act, does that actually mandate specific space and numbers that's required for development? So we have this policy, this legislative policy that we have to follow. Does it specifically mandate the numbers of homes, the development? Number one, that's my first question.
Okay, Mr. Nethery.
Mr. Mayor, I guess it's safe to say that what it does is establish targets for the region, and then it's up to the region as to how they see fit to distribute it to the local area municipalities. We worked with the region and the province in terms of identifying the area that's now known as the Provincial Urban Growth Centre, which is a subset of the total parcel that we're talking about. But that's the area where there were the 200 persons and jobs per hectare, I believe. So that's the one centered on Yonge around the Admin building up to Davis Drive. So it's administered almost like we deal with allocation. The province sets a target to the region. It's up to the region how they want to see that get distributed throughout its 9 municipalities. And then then within that, we're working within that milieu. So there was a target given to us, and, well, it wasn't just given to us. It was, we worked with them to achieve a number that we thought was reasonable.
Okay, so that, which is a great segue into my next question, which is basically, so it's the region that takes those numbers. Are those numbers specific, the target, or do they decide together, the region and the province, on what population numbers? I mean, I'm trying to figure out who comes to that conclusion. I understand what you're saying, that it's spread out amongst the region decides. But what I'm trying to find out is, are those is there one big chunk of a number and then you spread it out, or do you work in or does the province work in conjunction with the region to decide on that number?
Mr. Nethery?
Mr. Mayor, I think it's safe to say that the province worked in concert with all of the regions to determine those numbers, but we weren't at that table, so I don't know what the specific nature of the discussions were. We got involved subsequent to that, where we were then dealing as a region with our other local municipal partners to see how they would get divvied up.
So when you say you were not working with the region, that you're talking about you specifically, because I'm assuming that
the town of Newmarket didn't deal directly with the province on
right.
that.
That's
we dealt
okay. But you dealt with the region
through the region.
right? Okay.
Matt,
So
can I just ask a quick clarifying question on that? Because I think I'm confused on one small point. Can I just ask, sorry, but the region takes, allocates across the region, but is there not some, in place to grow in other provincial legislation, some numbers related to a provincially designated growth center, which Newmarket is? I think that's the.
Mr. Nethery?
Yeah, so that's, I think I alluded to that a moment ago, in that the Provincial Urban Growth Center is the area right on Yonge Street. Marion's sketching it out now. That contained, and we had discussions with the province and the region in the establishment of that. That's a number of years ago now. And that's, again, that's the one with the target of 200 persons and jobs per hectare.
Okay, so
right.
there is
and
a requirement.
yeah, I understood that.
If
Okay,
I can
so
add something to that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
The province, as Mr. Nethery indicated, has established the 200-person and jobs per hectare. The region went the next step further and identified a density for that same area, which is they call it their regional center. It's the same as our Provincial Urban Growth Center, of 2.5 FSI, which is higher than 200 persons and jobs per hectare if you do the translation. And so that's the target that we have to be in conformity with, and we are. We're just over 300 persons and jobs per hectare from a province point of view. And if you go down to look at our densities that we're anticipating in that area, we range from 1.5 to 3.5. So when we do the math around that, we will definitely hit the minimum of 2.5 that's required by the regional plan.
okay, so so the province establishes the jobs, the
Persons and jobs.
right, and the region establishes the population that would require those jobs.
They establish a density.
The density, okay. Okay, now, my final question then, so we have, in this plan, we have a build-out of 33,000 residents in addition to what we have now. And, sorry? Yeah, that's what I said. Including or in addition to?
Including. There's about
Okay, so what's the
2,600
final,
there now.
what would the final number be 30 years down the road then? What are we looking at?
33,000 is what we are projecting by build-out.
Okay, so if I was to say in 30 years what the population target is, what would the number be?
About 30,000. Because there's about 26,000
No,
there
I'm
now.
talking about what we have
2,600
right now.
there
I'm just talking as a whole in Newmarket. The population as a whole in Newmarket in 30 years from now is?
I
according to your
would
target?
prefer to go to build-out.
Well,
Because
and
we
I'm
don't know
asking
when
you for the,
build-out will be.
I'm asking for the total number, not the build-out. That's what I'm asking you.
Well, total number when?
You have that
Maximum
projection because it's in an
capacity.
email, so,
Yeah, I don't have it committed to memory in terms of the 30-year timeframe. At about build-out, it was about 130,000.
okay, right.
What year is built out?
That
was
That'll
approximately-
depend on the market, I think.
It was what, 20, 30 years?
About 2051.
2015, okay. that was the answer. So I guess going back to, well, I mean, really, you've answered my questions. And I think that's very important for the public to understand how that process works, because there, you know, we're going to be sitting here and saying, you know, we're sort of forced to do one thing, but we also have a choice. And I think the public wants to understand what our choices are and what the implications of those choices are. Again, we've heard the word OMB, and I'm just trying to find out if the legislation that we have now was specifically developed by the province or by the region, but you say that they worked in conjunction. I understand how that works, so thank you.
Just to clarify, who is responsible for what? So it's the province that introduced Places to Grow, and that was cascaded down to the region, correct? And the region then subsequently disperses that down into the municipality. But the legislation always rests with the province, just as a matter of clarification. Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Emmanuel?
Sorry, the use of the word target, I think is important. Can we also, you could probably view that as also minimum. Correct? I worry when we use the word target, because that creates this perception that that is the number, and it may potentially go below, but I believe the way, I mean, I look at the OMB Glumway decision, they really view target as, it's really minimum.
Ms. Pont?
Yes, typically your target is your minimum, and the wording in the regional plan is for the density at Young and Davis Urban Growth Center is a minimum of 2.5 FSI.
Yeah, and the only thing I might ask is, just because I actually think, in my view, and maybe it's just me, but I view those words very differently, and I think we should be using the word minimum. But that's just me. I don't know if my colleagues share that sentiment.
Thank you. Okay, we're at about 3:30. I wonder if we take a 15-minute break, and then we can move on to the other sections of the presentation. Okay? Okay, 3:45 is good. Well, yeah, I agree. Me too. quorum is quorum. Workshop will resume at 3:45. Good. Okay, Ms. Blunt, if we could go forward to the next items then.
Thank you very much. Now, what do we do here now? Just hit play?
Oh,
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we'll proceed forward now and deal with the rest of the topics. The next one is a little bit of a spillover from density and height, but there was a comment from York Region Rapid Transit that wanted to see some flexibility in the density policies to permit a lower density than the minimum. And in some situations, that would be warranted, especially where you've got the angular plane or shadow studies indicating such. So we have put policy wording in to the effect that lower densities would be contemplated. And in that way, we wouldn't be triggering an amendment to the plan if they came in at, in one area, they came in at 3 stories instead of 4, when 4 was the minimum, as an example. So the idea is to be a little bit more flexible and allow for the, the flexibility at a site-by-site basis without triggering an amendment to the plan.
okay. And any questions with respect to this? Or we can move on to the transition. No, I guess you've got some more, yeah, there's some more slides on that. Let's finish with that, and then we'll entertain questions.
Okay, the next topic then is the transitional and angular plane policies. And the comments from the region was one of the possibilities was to leave the angular plane to the zoning bylaw. And they added, of course, if appropriate, because it's, council did want to see that provision or the angular plane addressed to ensure we have protection to our stable residential areas adjacent to the secondary plan. And they also made the comment that the regional plan prohibits reducing density in medium and or high density areas. York Region Rapid Transit indicated that the transitional and angular plane policies negatively impacted density and should be more flexible. And in response to these comments, we've indicated that from our OP point of view, the density in our current official plan is not being reduced. The FSI, the minimum density of 1.5 FSI in the current plan is actually being increased to 1.0 to 1.5. So there isn't a disconnect with our parent official plan, as suggested. And also the regional plan suggests that, or requires that municipalities address compatibility with the adjacent lands, and the transitional policies do address that provision of the regional plan to address those sensitivities between not competing, but different land uses. But we have made some recommendations, and they're contained in the recommended document, that we add the word generally to the angular plane policies to read that generally not exceed 45 or 22 degree angular plane. Again, providing a little bit of flexibility. So if somebody comes in at, meeting the angular plane at 23 degrees, it doesn't trigger an amendment to the official plan. We also are recommending that the height adjacent to existing residential and parkland be increased from 2 to 3 stories. And again, that I feel is not incompatible with either a 2-story existing residential building, or in some cases they are 3 stories in fact, or even a 1-story building. A 3-story building, I think, is reasonably compatible with a 1-story or 1.5-story. And we also have clarified in the policies that the angular plane does not extend beyond the next public or private road. And this is a good example here where we've got a private road proposed. Now this one's a bit complicated by the fact that there's an existing or a proposed road here, and the backyards are here, but we wouldn't be proposing that the angular plane extend all the way out beyond this private road. Although, given the stories in this area, the designations wouldn't be that high in any event. Similarly here, if this were a public or a private road, the angular plane would stop at that next public or private road. So I think that's an improvement, gives a little more flexibility to ensure that you can have the heights out on Davis and Yonge.
Any questions with respect to that? Okay, we'll move on then to the transfer of density.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The transfer of density is a fairly complicated policy, and we got comments from York Region Rapid Transit and Weston Consulting that there should be some provision for notice to affected landowners where the density was being transferred from one portion of a site to another. And I think my analogy was a bit of like a piston, that if you aren't going to receive the density at one location on a site, it could rise in the other. So kind of you push it down here, it comes up here. And typically this pushing down would happen where you've got an angular plane being applied or heritage structures involved. And so we've put wording in to indicate that where that happens, meaning the density transfers to another portion of the property, there'd be notice provided to the affected landowners and an agreement with the town. So everybody gets involved in that exercise, so there's no there's complete transparency around it.
Any questions? Thank you. Bring up.
Okay, the next, we've touched on this already, Mr. Mayor, but I'll just summarize some of the points again. The regional shopping center study area, and the comments from Oxford was that they weren't at the stage yet to have completed their master planning, and they requested that the regional shopping center be an overlay to Schedule 4, which is the density and heights, and also Schedule 5, which is the road network. And that would allow them time to complete their studies. And they also requested deletion of the interim development policies, which restricted interim development to 10%. Metrolinx, as I mentioned, indicated that the mobility hub principles should apply to Yonge and Davis. And so what we've done is we've tried to embrace both their comments to give them all a little more time to do some of their homework. So the overlay has been applied to Schedules 4 and 5. We've incorporated in the list of matters to be dealt with by that study, which will include the region and the town and Metrolinx, the mobility hub guidelines and principles, so that it does effectively become a very comprehensive study that deals with the mobility hub implications. We have also recommended deleting the interim development policies, and that the current zoning bylaw would be the applicable law, so to speak, on the Upper Canada, the property, which is essentially a mixed use right now with a maximum height of, I believe, 6 stories.
Okay. All right, carry on.
Okay, the undergrounding hydro provisions, the York Region requested legal authority for dedication to the town of the 3 to 5 meters that we'd drafted into the secondary plan. And York Region recommended the policy be reviewed in conjunction with York Region, with the PPS. In terms of our planning analysis, we feel that the direction that we're taking in the secondary plan is in conformity with the regional official plan, in particular policy 7.5.4, which is to require local official plans to identify and protect infrastructure corridors for long-term servicing needs, and 7.5.6, which is to require underground installations of utilities where feasible in new community areas, regional centers and corridors, and to encourage buried utilities in the balance of the region. So we feel that the direction we're taking in the secondary plan implements and is in conformity with these two policies. The provincial policy statement also talks about transmission and distribution systems, and planning for infrastructure for these shall be coordinated and integrated with land use planning. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here, so that they are financially viable over the life cycle, which may be demonstrated through asset management planning. And as you know, with the secondary plan, we proposed the securing of the necessary space, the 2 to 5 meters, on either side of Yonge, on both sides rather, of Yonge and Davis, as a means of protecting for the long-term implications of putting hydro underground. And the comment about the life cycle with the PPS would coincide with when the poles are ready to be replaced, more or less. The underground policies, in terms of our analysis, is that and the legal authority is that it is in the jurisdiction of the town to adopt policies to that effect. The implementation, there's a couple tools, and we're looking at getting a little bit more fulsome legal advice. But generally, the policy currently is written that dedication and or easement would be an approach, and the incentives would apply similarly to a dedication and to an easement, as to an easement. In other words, the zero setback from the easement, encroachment agreements for surface use and so on. Oops. So that's the underground hydro policies, but we will get further legal advice on that.
Regional Councillor?
Have we had a response to our response? So they raised a concern, this is our response. Have we had a response to this response?
From the region? Not yet.
Okay.
Now, the plan just got posted on Friday, so they may not have had an opportunity, and we have had some conversations with them, but they wouldn't have had an opportunity to review the plan because it just got posted on Friday.
So, but, sorry.
You talking about
Mr.
the
Mayor, but
region?
surely we would, if they've raised a concern around that, we don't just post the plan and see if they read into, I mean, because that rationale wouldn't be in the plan, right? So we would respond to them and say, we're keeping it in, this is why. I mean, yes or no?
There's been a conversation, but we haven't had a response. But they haven't actually had the opportunity to read all the words because the plan didn't get posted until Friday. and the drafting of it was essentially ongoing up until that point.
But, okay, but we've sent them something other than posting the plan online. We've sent them something saying, we believe this should remain in the policy, and here's the rationale which you've outlaid here.
Specifically saying that we think, on this particular policy, no, we haven't sort of hived off each policy and let them know exactly what we're proposing.
Wouldn't that, I don't know if I'm missing something, but this is kind of a back and forth between different stakeholders. One of them is the region. If that's, wouldn't we go back to them and sort of say, we've accommodated certain things,
This was one of the
an area
last
we feel-
policies that we finalized on Thursday, and
Okay, I'll
That's
just
why
leave
it
it
was
out there, but I just
posted
think
on Friday.
we would want to respond to them maybe somehow in a,
I didn't have time actually between
Well, that's fine, yeah.
formulating all the documents together to sit down with them to have a fulsome conversation.
oh,
Mr.
fair.
Nithery?
And I also wanted to mention this has been an ongoing dialogue with them, so it's not like it's just you post it and then wait. It's evolving, this one in particular. And I should have mentioned this right at the outset. One of the things that council was interested in is making sure that we had a legal review of this document. And that has and is continuing to happen. And this is one of the areas that has some implications, and it's still sort of hot off the press. So for sure, we will be engaging them in a meaningful way so that we touch base with them. There were some fundamental concerns around the authority under the PPS that they were questioning, and I think we've well covered that. Now, the specifics of it are around the implementation side that we need to be comfortable with, and we're still working with them on that.
Yeah.
But your point's well taken, and we'll certainly make sure that it's not just thrown up on the internet
Right, yeah, just so there's
and wait for them to comment.
Well, actually, I thought if this is a summary of some of the modifications that we've made, the thought was initially just to forward a copy of this presentation on to the region, because ultimately they're going to be a planning authority, but there may be a better way to do that,
Yep.
and I'll leave that to you.
Good suggestion.
Yep. Okay, let's carry on then.
Okay, the next topic is affordable housing. And this is one where we have been in complete dialogue with the region on. And what we've proposed is that essentially what the region had originally commented to us on, and that was characterized and or included in the revised draft, was that the 35% affordable housing target apply not only to the regional center or the provincial urban growth center, but also to the healthcare character area. And now we've gone back to to sort of square one on this now, because as you recall, with the revised draft, the properties on the north side of Queen Street were taken out of the regional healthcare area, which was an area which had a fairly large opportunity or significant opportunity for some residential. So what we're recommending through the plan on in this version is that the 35% affordable housing apply only to the urban provincial urban growth center and not specifically to the regional healthcare center. The scale of the area that's left now for mixed use and residential in particular would equate to about 1,100 residents, which is not a very significant area. And of course, as you know, the focus in this area is more toward employment related to the hospital and other employment type uses. So we're recommending through this plan that the minimum 25% apply outside the provincial urban growth center, 35% within the provincial urban growth center. This does not preclude anyone coming forward with more than 25% affordable, particularly in the ownership, because as we know, the ownership is about $400,000 per unit. And when you get into condominium, I think it's going to be easy to accommodate units less than 400,000. So I think we're meeting the provisions of the regional plan, which basically does identify simply the urban growth center and key development areas, and we don't have any key development areas as defined by the regional plan.
Okay, thank you. Move on to population and jobs.
This is the chart that we've included in the plan that identifies the people and jobs by character areas and illustrates the FSI to be achieved and the population that translates as a result of the mixed use and the applicable FSI at 33,000 for the people and 32,000 for the jobs. And this, of course, meets our target of a 1-to-1 ratio within the urban centers, which is in the town's plan, and the 1-to-1 ratio in the region's plan as well for the urban growth center, where we have, and I haven't put it on the slide, but approximately 7,000 persons and 7,000 jobs within the provincial urban growth center.
Okay, regional councillor.
I'm sorry?
Thanks. Just a couple of questions on this one. The predominant land use, how does that get realized through this process? Or is that just a general categorization?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we would have to monitor development as the applications come in to ensure that we're still trying to achieve that balance. And if an application came in and they didn't propose any commercial, we would be trying to encourage more commercial to increase the job side of things. Or major office is another way of increasing, or even office is a way of increasing the job side of things. So there will be a requirement for the town to monitor as applications come in to see that we're keeping pace with what we are hoping to achieve.
But if we want it to be, let's say, more major office at Yonge and the proposal's not coming that way, or more mixed use, how do you, sorry, I should probably understand this better, but this is not zoning, correct? So is this just a categorization? And does it get categorized in this document, and is it enforceable, or?
These are the targets that we're aiming for to achieve the balance of jobs and population.
So I'm just talking about the land use. I know the land use translates into people and jobs, but for now the land use, just so I understand, it's a categorization. It's not a designation. So it's not realized in a zoning change at this point. They're still zoned the way they're zoned.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. The mixed use, which is the predominant land use,
Or
is
major office.
addressed in the secondary plan, where you have the list of all the permitted uses that would happen, or be permitted rather, in each of the character areas. Some areas we have weighted a little more toward major office, and you see that in the Young Civic area. Major office, as you know from the PPS, is identified at 5,000 square meters and greater. So we've identified major office at Young and the Young Civic area in particular, Young Davis in particular. It's not identified, for example, in Young North, where we don't see office being a focus up there. And you see the major institutional being identified as one of the predominant land uses within the Regional Health Care Center.
So, and I'm worried, maybe I'm worried about something I shouldn't, and I probably don't fully get this, and I should, but why would we have the word major office after Young Civic, but not after Young Davis? Maybe that's a better way to phrase it, so you can help me understand, because I'm
Young Civic, if you look at the proportion, let's see, it's, Young Civic is 50-50, whereas when you go to Young Davis, it's 65% residential versus 35. So you see,
So those words are simply a way of translating into those numbers that follow it. That's all they really do.
yes. And also the persons and jobs.
Okay.
And
So
the-
they
and the
don't,
gross
they
clerical
don't
floor area.
encourage or limit anybody's ability to build office in any of those areas.
Sorry,
They don't encourage or limit anybody's ability to build office, for example, in any area, or do they?
through you, Mr. Mayor, office is a permitted use in all of the
Right.
character areas.
So we just add the word major office as a way of implying we're looking for more employment at that center in the mix of 50-50 as opposed to 65-35.
Yes, and as I've indicated, Mr. Mayor, major office is identified in most of the designations with the exception of Young North and Davis Drive.
Did you think about changing, so the higher density allowances we have, you see those as largely being residential, not office, and that's why they reflect, I'm just wondering, like the Mulock area is still, it's still largely, the mix is higher residential than Young Civic, for example. Is that because you see those higher densities and heights probably being residential as opposed to office?
Yes, in the Young South, which is the Mulock
Right.
intersection, you can see we have 6,300 residents and 2,800 jobs. In that area, we also have 2 school sites now identified because of the weight going more toward the residential.
Okay. So, but at the end of the day, these are designation, or titles and projections for what we see the mix being. It doesn't, if somebody wants to build an impressive office space and bring lots of office jobs to the corner of Young and Mulock, that's great.
Yes, yes.
We wouldn't say, no, we want to see more residential there, or we'd like you to make a residential component.
And I'll,
That's my only concern, if I don't think I'm coming across it. But is that fair, or?
I think it is fair. I'm just wanting to check something here. Yeah, major office is permitted there in any event, as one of our permitted uses.
Right, so these are just more directions, they're not going to limit anybody that's wanting to do
No,
something like that.
they're meant to be targets that we monitor. And we may choose at the 5-year review, as we look at things that happen in the area, we may want to tweak these targets.
Right, okay.
But it doesn't require, like, what's the mechanism where we kind of control or steer or direct the application? So if you get one tower that well, we'll use, let's say Young North, that creates, say, 2,000 jobs, which might be extreme, then does that mean anybody else who wants to build would be restricted in that area from adding more jobs? Or how do we control that? Or how do we say deal, or how do we disperse those jobs across the different land areas?
As I mentioned, Mr. Mayor, I think we have to monitor and retest at each 5-year review. Now, Young North doesn't have the provision for major office.
Okay.
I'm relying on my memory.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't have the provision for major office as an example, again, and that's where we have the 2 school sites, because we see that as being more residential. But the same principle would apply. We do have to monitor as we go. This is to build out. This isn't tomorrow or even 5 years from now. This is more like 40 years from now.
One more question, can I ask? Is there a way to, is there any examples in other secondary plans or official plans where people tie, or do you do it through allocation or other ways, but where you tie, let's say this is your build-out projection, and it makes sense to imagine this to build out, and it makes sense to even plan to build out. I think it's the longer your planning horizon, the better in some ways, even though it gets more theoretical the further out you go. But are you able to tie it to certain infrastructure? I mean, you do it, I guess there's different ways you do it through the planning process, but is there any examples of allowing certain amounts to occur, or certain amounts per year, or certain amounts or tranches dependent on certain key infrastructure? So let me give a wild example. Let's say we think this is realistic up to 50%, and I'm being really, really off the cuff to just illustrate my point. Up to 50% this is realistic, given certain conditions and our ability to do some fine grid stuff, but beyond that, it's not unless let's say the Bradford bypass gets built. Is there anything, approaches like that taken, how you're aware of, or?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, most plans, including the secondary plan, requires that development be phased, and that we monitor as we go, and that development not proceed unless the necessary infrastructure is in place to accommodate that development. Which is why, when you heard from Mr. Mays earlier, we're talking about the transportation infrastructure, and how certain components have to be in place before we add further population jobs. So it will be with each application we require, through the application process, they do a detailed transportation analysis, so that will trigger, if they're putting in X number of people and that exceeds the threshold that you have to have this next road in, then we have built the plan to require that ongoing phasing to ensure that infrastructure is addressed and keeps pace with the development as it goes.
So, I guess, I see what you're saying. I guess what I'm wondering is, and I can imagine it'd be difficult, because, I hear the transportation studies have to get done with each development, but to be blunt, I've never seen a developer hire a transportation company that came back and said, we think your development's going to not work. So I mean, is there, I guess, because they do the transportation studies, and then that can be used at the OMB, for example, would it be very difficult or probably unlikely to be supportable if you were to put in some place, I mean, we talked about it before with, even our official plan had references to certain FSIs dependent upon the completion of the Viva project. I mean, I know when they talk about these projects all the time, it's dependent on infrastructure, but they largely mean, I read, is they largely mean allocation. But so what we did with the official plan around the Viva project, could we do around other types of infrastructure that we deemed significant or important for the community to handle?
Let me direct that to Mr. Nethery.
Thanks. I've been chomping at the bit. I think that the short answer is yes. Now, you'd have to be careful about which measures you were utilizing, because they got to be something in our control. So I think you mentioned the Bradford bypass. That may or may not be a good example, because it's not something we can directly influence.
It would have to be in our control.
Well, I'm thinking that would be appropriate, or at least under the region's control. So, and you're right. I was going to, as you were posing the question, I was thinking, well, that's exactly what we've done historically when we did the original OP, and then set a requirement, because it was sort of set it at one threshold of density and height. But a requirement that when the transit system was in place or moving forward, and it was also tied to road improvements and things of that nature, that would enable us to do the secondary plan. So the answer is certainly yes, you can do that. I'm not sure of the universe of examples that are out there, but it's not unlike what we would be utilizing through our allocation stuff, and certainly I know Rachel's busy working on some work associated with infrastructure necessary and improvements to it to facilitate this kind of work. And the last point I was going to make is, in terms of how you implement this, and these are broad characterizations of those little areas.
Right.
We used to call them. There was those neat little names that people had come up with, but ultimately they will be implemented through zoning. That's going to be the next thing that we need to do, and so the zoning will be certainly informed through this kind of an exercise here, be it zoning or development permit system or however we land. So I think coupled with that is how you sort of move forward. But I couldn't agree more with Marion in as much as these are sort of things there that can influence target setting and that you look at them through time. And, if it's 5 years from now when we're looking at it again, we'll have to see whether or not it's necessary to adjust some of those things and what the market's been doing in the interim.
Okay.
And did we not have certain requirements needing to be met before we lifted the H on Leicester Square as an example? So before they could go forward, they had to meet certain items. Is that so? There are some mechanisms that permit us to do some of that. Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions?
Mr. Mayor, this takes us to, in terms of the secondary plan, the last page, which is some editorial changes that I've just picked up on. I mean, there's a number of editorial changes. They're all in the track changes document. But these are the highlights from an editorial point of view. We've added a 4th school site in response to the French Public School Board in the south. And that's right next to the S3 in the area north of Savage on the east side of Yonge Street. We've enhanced the accessibility policies in a number of locations throughout the plan in response to York Region. And we've also enhanced the streetscape policies, and in particular the provision for wider sidewalks in accordance with the regional plan as well. And we've added provision for lower densities where the angular plane policies apply. So those are the main editorial changes. But as I say, there are numbers of editorial changes, but we might be here till 12 o'clock if I walked you through them all. So I'd encourage you to look at the bold highlight. Well, actually, they're bold in the track changes version. I noticed there's a couple that didn't get bolded, like the one that Councillor Taylor raised earlier about the provision for discouraging the smaller parcels from being developed. And I did find that policy, Mr. Mayor, so that if people want to refer back to it and look at it, a policy that discourages development of smaller parcels that was raised by Councillor Taylor earlier. Mm-hmm. And it's in the track changes version, it's on page 107 of 156. And if you want, I can walk you through that now if you prefer, or if not, we can...
I think the specifics of the language, I think what we wanted to do was make sure that we captured the intent. And if that reference point, then members of council can have a look at those individually.
Okay.
Yep, sure. All right.
Just very quick on that exact point. I'd just like to ask staff just in the interim to look at that area and look if it could be tighter. My feeling on it right now is that I think it addresses the area, but I think the strongest wording is that the discouraging part.
Yeah, development of smaller parcels is strongly discouraged.
Right. So I guess what I'm wondering though is there, and I don't know about all the planning and legal implications, but if there's a way to strengthen that so that those parcels can only be redeveloped for mixed-use purposes in conjunction with a Davis fronting block, or whether we limit access from the residential streets or other provisions to ensure that the goal, I mean, we're doing this for a reason. And the tighter we can realistically, and I'm only saying realistically, I don't understand all, but the tighter we can make it to ensure that it achieves that purpose, as opposed to maybe discourages but ends up still being some sort of small, to use my example, I always use some sort of small plaza on the back that got tagged on. So I'd love us to just look at that a little more to see if it is possible or realistic or recommended to tighten that up even more.
Thank you. Councillor Manuel?
I'm used to dealing with schools and the, I guess more the subdivision application process, and this is a bit bigger, higher level, and trying to understand, I mean, my knowledge when they go through the subdivision process, they can sit on a site for so long. Could they, in theory, sit on a site for the length of this document? Is that how it works? I just, the inclusion of a French school is interesting, but trying to understand how that works feasibly, because it's so much different than a subdivision process.
Well, we have to put the placeholder in now because we know we're planning for a certain population. So then as the development application comes forward, what we would want to be doing is reserving a site, not unlike we do with plans of subdivision. You reserve a site. The school may not pick it up right away, but we have an obligation under the Planning Act to provide for our, the infrastructure to support the development. So the timing may very well depend upon when that critical mass is there. So I think as long as we reserve the site, I think that's the best we can do until the critical mass is there.
Sorry, which schedule would the school site come on?
That,
Three? Right. But it's still within the, okay, S3, S4, gotcha. But, so they've identified those, the boards have identified those specific sites. And sorry, I know this is probably, they did some time ago. We just had the addition of the French school, but they identified those specific sites on this plan.
that's correct, Mr. Mayor.
And so, but they can sit on those, I guess, the life of this document in theory. And then if there is or is not a need, say 20 years from now, or,
Maybe I should refer to Mr. Nethery. He's
Mr.
got more
Nethery?
experience when schools sit on sites, if in fact they do.
The example here is a little bit different than what we've been used to, where the developer perhaps grudgingly has given up a site because he doesn't get to realize the development potential on it, on a ground-related, more conventional development. And the school board has the right of dealing with it over time. In these instances, we're talking about sites that are currently developed, and so my guess is that you wouldn't see any change until someone came forward with an application to redevelop those properties. I'm thinking of, there's a couple school sites on what I think is Walmart.
Wolco, oh my goodness. Actually,
Walmart
reference
used to be a
Kresge's or
Wolco,
something.
okay. Oh, stop it. So to that end, it's not going to be quite the same. I don't know that you would have a site that's sitting there vacant with a building that was taken out and being delayed. But I think it might be a little bit more dynamic relationship here where the owners of those properties can perhaps force the hand of the school board into having that conversation.
Okay. That was more my, okay.
But it's a different, and the kind of schools that you're going to see here are not likely to be the conventional sorts. I mean, they might be a little bit like that one that we saw down in North Toronto, where they're part of a development and, shared arrangements as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Blunt?
Okay. And I'm just going to hit some of the high points on the active transportation network and OPA 11. And this has been a fairly positive application. As I indicated, it was conducted in parallel with the secondary plan. We had good feedback from generally from the public. And we've had a fairly thorough internal vetting as well with the different departments, engineering services, recreation, and so on. So we're fairly confident in bringing forward the recommendations with respect to the active transportation network. And this is the Schedule D that we're recommending, and there are some policies as well in Official Plan Amendment number 11. And in terms of the changes from the draft that went out in I guess, the early part of the year. You can see I've highlighted in blue on this schedule the changes from that original draft that went out. So there hasn't been many changes. We've got a few modifications, mostly all additions. And then we also have our prioritization, and we worked with the region on their, in terms of their regional road priorities for active transportation on regional roads. And you'll see there's segments of Davis and Bathurst, segment on Mulock, and over here on Leslie. And of course, Young will be, as part of the Viva Next project, they're planning for the raised cycling facility on Yonge Street. So we've aligned the 0 to 5 year priorities with their priorities, and we also looked at the town's priorities with respect to some of our capital projects on how they can dovetail with integration of the secondary plan or the active transportation network in the next 0 to 5 years. And so they're reflected in that priority. Now, the priority mapping is not going to be part of the actual official plan number 11. It's in the background document to guide council in terms of their priorities. When you combine the 0 to 5 year of the active transportation network on road as well as off-road, it's in the order of 8 to 9 million if they're implemented, but that's certainly at council's discretion. So that completes all the topics, Mr. Mayor.
There's an active transportation route proposed to cross over the railroad south of Mulock. And I'm only going back to our experience where we had a pedestrian crossing just opposite London Road, and the requirements for CN and GO Transit to be satisfied that there was a proper signaling system. So just I would like that to be part of the consideration as we go forward there, because it will change the traffic patterns. And there were some issues, Mr. Prentice, about liability and
the active transportation plan, Mr. Mayor, through you, shows a grade separated crossing at that location. I don't think that you'll get Metrolinx or CN to approve any more grade level crossing.
okay, good. So you're ahead on this one. Good. Good to see.
Sorry, I missed where that crossing was again. You said
Crossing is south of
Taylor Trail.
Yep. Okay, and it's not at
Oh.
grade, so that's good. So that's
Here.
that's the great answer. Thank
yes, we've
You're ahead of me. Good.
sorry.
Yeah, over
Oh
the
yes,
railroad,
over there. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. 'Cause that created a considerable amount of angst in terms of making sure that worked. But the fact that it's not at grade, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Emmanuel?
Just on the Schedule D, that shows the two sort of, the circles, the legend references. I actually think the circle are capturing the Upper Canada Mall property, the 800 meter, I don't know if that's radius or diameter, but captures kind of the three as we talked about earlier. So that I think reflects some of what we've been discussing. The only thing I might say is that on the legend, it references future GO Transit station. And I guess the one on the right of the two, that's already an established GO Transit station. And the one on the left, there is one within it, but I guess it's more referencing the regional mobility hub. I wonder if the language then is with future GO station on the legend should be amended to reflect the study that's required, or I don't know, I throw that out more as a comment right now, and maybe we put some thought into it, because I actually think the circle on the left kind of captures exactly what we were talking about earlier and what you referenced, and that part of the Upper Canada Mall can discuss, but the GO Transit already exists on the right circle as well, and it is not a future GO Transit station.
Mr. Mayor, if I can respond, I think the future GO Transit station is the symbol matches the one down at Mulock
Oh,
and where
sorry.
the GO train crosses.
I'm mixing up mine.
And yes, this schedule is not clear in that regard, and I'll see if we can fix that up between now and Monday.
I see. So that is, what would the 800 meter, yeah, no, I see that now.
Yeah. I wonder if
I'm
you
mixing up my
might-
dashed circles. One's just, so what would that represent, the top one on the legend?
The dash circles are 800 meters from a mobility hub, and it also includes the planned rapid way station at Young and Mulock,
I wonder
or
if
Young
you-
and Davis, rather.
But they are not referenced on the legend, though. It's
They're
only the
not,
bottom
and
one.
that's what's making it
Okay,
confusing.
perfect, no,
Okay.
thank you.
I wonder if you might just show that on the overhead
Yeah.
for
Okay.
anybody who's watching the streaming,
All
so
right,
they
so-
can see what we're referencing in the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This circle here, the reference is to 800 meters from a transit station. Similarly here, 800 meters. That is not on the legend, which is confusing things. What is on the legend is the, this future GO transit station. Where's my mouse here? Come on, mouse, here we are. And that refers to this station, which is the one that was embedded in the official plan with OPA 7. So, and I apologize for that confusion.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Being no further questions, then we'll motion to adjourn? Okay. We don't need to procedurally, or do we? Procedurally? It's procedural. Okay, we can, motion to receive and adjourn. All right? Councillor Emmanuel, Councillor Kerwin, all those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.